Why would I stop eating meat if I'm just going to replace it with a bunch of UPF alternatives? This is a concern for a lot of people right now because they're concerned about how much ultra-processed food they're eating, and all the headlines are telling them that if you give up meat, you're going to be eating more. And look, I've been vegan for about 18 years now, and there was once upon a time where I ate meat, then I went pescatarian, then I went vegetarian, then I went vegan. And I think a lot of us go through that when we go vegan. So I am someone that has eaten those diets. I know anecdotally that the closer I got to vegan, the more whole foods I was eating. So seeing these headlines leave me with a few question marks. It just isn't adding up to me. And also, if I am eating more UPFs than the regular person, I do think that's something I need to check into and readjust my diet accordingly. So yeah, apparently vegetarians are eating more ultra-processed foods than meat eaters, according to studies. So we're clicking through onto one of these articles, and we're going to find the study, and we're going to look in to see which diet actually eats the most ultra-processed foods. So right here, vegetarians eat more UPFs than their carnivorous counterparts, a major UK study has revealed. This is a headline from late November 2024. A team of experts led by Imperial College London surveyed nearly 200,000 Brits on their daily average UPF intake as well as their diet in general. They found UPFs accounted for a fifth of the diet of all participants, but vegetarians were the most likely to rely on them. Let's take a look at the study. And the reason I want to look deeper is one, because I naturally am thinking, I don't believe this. And I know headlines can be sensationalizing. I know that they love to dig on vegans, and a lot of the times beneath the headlines, it can be a misconstrued study. And I just want to figure out if it's telling me the truth and I need to have a bit of reality check, or if it's kind of stretching the truth and manipulating it to give a narrative that they would like to give, and that will get the clicks and the headlines and the ad revenue and the money, and not really with my best interest in heart, or even a meat eater. Giving an anti-vegan narrative isn't just bashing vegans. It can kind of hide the truth of what we actually do need to do to eat healthier as a society. The dietary shift towards plant-based options is increasingly popular, but the quantity of ultra-processed foods they contain is largely unknown. This study assesses the level of UPF and minimally processed food consumption amongst regular and low meat eaters, flexitarians, pescatarians, vegetarians, and vegans in a large data set of UK adults. It's interesting. It sounds like a good study to do. I'm curious about which of these diets eats the most UPFs, and I think it'd be interesting data to have. So you've got the vegans who are never eating animal-based foods, vegetarians that never eat meat or fish, pescatarians who never eat meat but do eat fish, flexitarians who consume meat or fish less than twice a week, low red meat eaters who consume fish/poultry more than once a week but red/processed meat under twice a week, and regular meat eaters who consumed red/processed meat more than once a week. So that is interesting. They've really gone in and defined the meat eating. They've got 3 categories for meat eaters. You've got flexitarians, low red meat eaters, and regular red meat eaters. So that is quite interesting. It's nice that they've not grouped them all together, because those are quite big differences. There are about 200,000 people in the study. And yeah, let's look at the results. This graph here is showing us by diet how much processed foods we're eating. So you've got Nova 1 and 2, which are the less processed foods in the light blue. And then medium blue, you've got Nova 3, which is pretty processed. And then ultra processed is the dark blue of Nova 4. And you can kind of see it's all very similar. The worst score is actually for the regular red meat eater, with vegetarian not far behind. But the headline said vegetarians eat more ultra processed food than meat eaters, which I do believe could be true if you were to average out all the meat eaters. But the regular red meat eater was the worst, and that was not the headline they chose to go for. I'm not saying that vegetarian diets didn't deserve to be critiqued. I'm just saying they explicitly chose not to critique the regular red meat eater. Next in line, you had vegans with 22.7% of ultra-processed food. Then you had the flexitarian, just below that, the low red meat eater. And then significantly lower, you had a pescatarian. So the pescatarians actually did the best. So really the headline could have been, pescatarians eat the least amount of ultra-processed foods and regular red meat eaters eat the most, which kind of completely changes the headline and says, hey, maybe we should be cutting out meat. But instead they chose to give a different narrative. And again, I don't even think I would have gone for any of these headlines, not one championing pescatarian over the meat eater, although there is a significant difference. The pescatarians are definitely doing the best by a considerable amount, but generally I think what we're seeing there is every diet they've studied has a 20 to 25% intake of ultra-processed foods, which kind of to me shows that if that's a bad amount of ultra-processed foods to be eating, we're all struggling here, and it is something we need to look at for every diet, because I don't think that is a really big difference to kind of pit one diet against another. It sounds like it's actually a bit more of a systemic issue. So when we're looking at the Nova 3 category of foods, which is beer and wine, cheese, processed bread, vegetable and other plant foods preserved in brine, and canned and cured meat and fish, regular red meat eaters form the worst for that. They're at 12.3%. So again, not ultra processed foods, but very processed foods. That space in between where it's still pretty processed, but not ultra processed. So they're at 12.3%. Then it goes down to low red meat, and then flexitarian at around 10%, low red meat eater 9.6%. And then you start going down with the pescatarian 8.8%, vegetarian 7.9%, and vegan at 5.6%. So yeah, we're doing actually pretty well, because then when you get to the final part, which is looking at the Nova 1 and Nova 2 foods, which are minimally processed foods, right? Vegans are actually coming out on top. We're close to 72% of minimally processed foods in our diet. Nova category 3 is processed foods, Nova category 4 is ultra processed foods. So when we're talking about like who eats the most processed foods, it's not vegans. We're actually doing the best for not eating processed foods. Next in play, you have pescatarians, who are at 70.8%. So I'd say we're pretty much neck and neck with a pescatarian according to this. Low red meat eaters and vegetarians very similar. Flexitarian really not far behind. Regular red meat eater is eating the most processed foods. When you're combining processed foods and ultra processed foods together, they're at 63.5% of unprocessed foods or minimally processed foods. So these headlines kind of pinning it all on vegetarians and vegans are just really misleading. They're kind of saying our diets are bad and giving the implication that eating meat is fine and you don't have to worry about all this processed food, when that is not the case at all. And that is jeopardizing the health of meat eaters who aren't really necessarily aware of how bad that ultra processed food consumption is, because they're no longer thinking of ultra processed food as like bacon and crisps and biscuits and cakes. They're thinking of them just as like the vegan fake meat aisle and vegan yogurts, and thinking, well, I don't eat that, so I'm fine. When that's not true. And your perception of what's healthy in the supermarkets is really being skewed and misled by these headlines. So that first graph we saw was mean percent of total food intake. And this second graph is about the total energy intake, which is pretty similar. I'm not going to go into it again because I think both these graphs kind of showed that generally, as much as I'd love to make a headline about vegans eating the least amount of processed food, I don't think that's the takeaway. I think the takeaway is that we're all actually consuming very similar amounts of processed food. And that it is incredibly unfair to slam vegans for eating the most processed foods when actually the data says we're not. I hope that kind of clears it up. And we've got more graphs down here, which kind of show how we're getting our consumption in of like the unprocessed foods. All of us are having a lot of tea and coffee. Fruit-wise, shocker, vegans are eating the most fruit, and the regular red meater is the worst for that. We're eating a lot more vegetables than everyone else, twice the amount of a regular red meat eater. Obviously, the vegans are having no milk and plain yogurt, so we're down on that one. Pasta, vegans are eating the most of that as well, but they're all pretty similar too. I don't think there's really much takeaway there other than vegans are eating the most fruit and veg, which is kind of what you'd expect, but also something I would correlate to having a healthy diet. So again, I don't know where the slander for vegans is coming from this study. When it comes to the Nova 2 category of foods, across all the diets, we're getting most of it from beer and wine. I love wine, so I'd definitely be in that category. But apparently the regular red meat eater is drinking more beer and wine than a vegan. I wouldn't say I really relate to these results, but apparently, yeah, vegans and vegetarians are drinking less alcohol. Another big chunk there is from stuff like cheese, but we all seem to have a good chunk of like bread in there. You know, everyone's been kind of having a go at bread, but if you're actually looking at it, a lot of us are kind of having these sort of like processed foods from stuff like beer and wine. So cutting out alcohol might be an easier win than cutting out bread if you're really concerned about ultra processed foods. And now we are on to Nova 4. Here we are all having a similar amount of industrial processed breads. Carbonated drinks as well is a big portion. I generally don't drink fizzy drinks, so I'm feeling like that's a bit of a win. Ready to go food, pretty similar across the board. I will say, you know, regular red meat eaters and vegetarians are doing the worst for that. Dairy-based drinks and vegan yogurts is the next one up, and obviously vegans are smallest for that. I think you can just see the vegan one there. It's the plant-based milk alternatives there which make up a big chunk of our Nova 4 category, which not a lot of other people are experiencing. But still, it doesn't put us ahead of vegetarians or regular red meat eaters. And I think the thing that really frustrates me about this whole battle against UPFs is that it's such a simplistic way of looking at food. And to equate like biscuits to a vegan sausage, I find just a bit silly, because I know I'm not getting much nutritional value from a regular biscuit, but like a vegan sausage will be helping me out my like protein intake. So it's not really just about like what category they're in, because like I say, a slice of bread is probably going to have more health benefits to you than a glass of wine, let's be honest. But in this, they're both Nova 3 processing, so you could just put them on the same level there and just be like, both are just as bad for you, which I really just don't think is what we should be taking from this. And yeah, even in the study, when they're talking about the takeaways, they say that the mean proportion of minimally processed food consumption was lowest amongst regular meat eaters and highest amongst vegans. So we are doing the best on eating minimally processed foods. The mean UPF consumption was lowest among pescatarians and highest among regular meat eaters. Compared with regular meat eaters, vegans consumed a moderately larger amount of Nova 1 fruit, vegetables, legumes, and nuts. Foods which I generally say are regarded as healthy foods. Several UPFs, including industrially processed breads, carbonated drinks, and ready meals, were commonly consumed by all diet types. And as you'd expect, the consumption of plant-based milk, meat alternatives were substantially higher amongst pescatarians, vegetarians, and vegans. And at the end of this, they have the discussion. The large cross-sectional analysis of the UK Biobank study found no clear patterns for either UPF or minimally processed food consumption, according to increasing levels of animal-sourced food avoidance. Consumption of UPFs was high in all diet types and represented more than 20% of daily food intake and more than 46% of daily energy intake amongst study participants. There really haven't been that many studies about UPFs. This is the largest one, and it has like 200,000 participants. There were 2 smaller studies, which they make note of. One study analysed consumption of a few selected UPFs in a German sample and found vegetarians were more likely to consume plant-based meat alternatives but less likely to consume fast food, sweet and salty snacks, and ultra-processed beverages compared to high meat eaters. Another study of French sample analysed data collected using the same dietary assessment methods. They found higher UPF consumption in the diets of vegetarians and vegans and meat eaters. Again, they were smaller, and the smaller sample size, the less reliable your insights are. If any of the rest you remember that from GCSE science. I think this is kind of just trying to show that even when you're trying to step away from meat products and stuff like that, you are still consuming a lot of ultra-processed foods. It's really hard in any diet to avoid these things in like our modern food consumptions. And you know, it's no secret that we are going to have to eat less meat. The Climate Change Committee literally like a week or 2 ago said that Brits needed to eat less meat. Only about 2 kebabs worth of meat is what they suggested. And I think that was a very modest request. We are in a climate crisis and we need to be eating less meat. So we are expecting more pescatarians, vegetarians, vegans. And I think the study is just trying to say like, we need to make sure that people transitioning to these diets are being kind of advised on how to do that in a more like whole foods way, rather than letting them just rely on the ultra-processed alternatives to meat. The final line of their study is that this large UK-based study found similarly high UPF consumption among diet types regardless of their levels of animal-sourced food avoidance. Policies that encourage the urgent need to transition to more sustainable and plant-based dietary patterns should promote the consumption of minimally processed foods and rebalancing diets away from UPFs. Whilst I do agree, I also do think that it is hard to encourage people to transition to a more vegan, plant-based diet without having these ultra-processed food alternatives. You know, I've been vegan a long time, and back in 2007, a lot of people were quite critical of the diet and saying that our meat alternatives were too rubbish. Fast forward to 2025, we have incredible alternatives, and I know plenty of meat eater who will pick the vegan Greggs sausage roll over the regular one, or will have a vegan Beyond Meat burger instead of a beef one, because they are trying to be like healthier and kinder to the planet. But one thing that makes it really easy for them is by making these swaps and having something like a vegan Greggs sausage roll available next to the regular meaty one. So I do understand this study and its desire for there to be less ultra-processed vegan foods, but right now I really do think they're essential in helping people transition over and cutting down on their meat consumption. I think meat has become such a part of our culture and such a part of our plates. And I would love for people to enjoy a meal without meat, but for now it just looks incomplete to so many meat eaters. And by adding that substitute in, it just helps them with the transition. It might not be where they are 3 years into being a vegan, but generally for the first 3 months, yes, it might help them with their transition into a plant-based diet. And it can be a transitional food or the odd treat rather than a regular part of our diet. And yeah, one final thing to say about this study, which has been making headlines in like late 2024 and is continuing to be battled against vegans in 2025. This study actually took place in 2011 to 2012. So this data was taken over 10 years ago. And if you think about how much our food systems have changed since then, especially in like the vegan space, I don't know how much this represents life today, where people maybe have less time to cook at home, are more likely to grab food on the go, which is going to be ultra processed, and also like the amount of vegan ultra processed foods in the supermarket has shot up and expanded crazily. Also on this, you had 199,502 UK Biobank participants. The mean age was 58.2 years old, which I think is pretty old. 55.1% were women, so it was mostly women taking part of this. 96% were of white ethnicity, and most participants, 72%, were frequent meat eaters, 1 in 5 were flexitarian, much fewer were pescatarians, 2.5%, vegetarian 2.1%, and vegan at 0.08%. This study, which is making headlines everywhere, is 1, old, it was done like over 10 years ago, 2, it's super white, 3, the mean age is 58, which I think is pretty old and not necessarily representative of everyone's eating habits. And the data collected for pescatarians, vegetarians, and vegans was pretty small. So it's really hard to say with a data size that small that it's going to be reliable information. So yeah, whilst I appreciate this may be the best study on ultra processed foods we've got right now, and I'm sure a lot are going to be coming out soon, considering how much media attention this has had, I just wouldn't give any of these headlines or any of the pressure on the ultra processed food thing that much weight. I just think we all understand the pillars of healthy eating, and it's best to stick to that. Like, eat more veg, eat more fruit. And I agree, more home cooking and not so much food on the go, ultra processed foods should be good for you. Yeah, I just think maybe focus a bit more on common sense, and also just be wary about the headlines you read. I also understand that we don't all have like an hour to spare to like dig deep into every inflammatory headline we see, but if you can, please do it. The clickbaits are coming for us, so please stop bashing vegans and vegetarians for eating more ultra processed foods. It is not the case. It is the media really twisting a story which was saying something else. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this video. Like I say, I really try not to give ultra processed foods too much brain space. I really do think we're overcomplicating healthy eating, but it is such a trending topic right now. A lot of people can't even define what an ultra processed food is. So it's like we're giving so much attention to something that is so badly defined. But yeah, it's trending right now, right? And everyone is using it to gauge how healthy a diet is. And whilst I'm sure it is an important piece of the puzzle, right now it's just being blown out of proportion. When you've been around long enough, you can see these trends come and go. And this seems to be the healthy eating trend at the moment, which is why I am talking about it and will continue to talk about it, because I am so sick of this being weaponized against vegans in the most unfair way. I keep seeing headlines about vegans and ultra processed foods, and then like reading the book, reading the study, and seeing that the headlines are just not adding up to the information. So I'm here fighting for veganism, and that's not going to stop. So yeah, thank you so much for watching the video, and I hope to see you again soon. Bye.